The sky over the Rhineland belonged to death that day. October 12th, 1943. 23,000 feet above German-occupied territory, a formation of B-17 flying fortresses droned westward, black smoke trailing from damaged engines, the air thick with cordite and fear. The kind of fear that tastes like copper on your tongue. Inside tail number 42-3-067. First Lieutenant Robert Hayes gripped the control yoke with white knuckles. The fortress shuddered violently. A 20mm cannon shell had just torn through the number 3 engine, and now black smoke poured from the cowling like blood from a wound that wouldn't clot. The aircraft's nose dropped 15 degrees. Hayes felt the controls go heavy in his hands, sluggish, like the bomber itself knew it was dying. Behind him, in the cramped radio compartment, Sergeant Mike Donnelly watched hydraulic fluid spray across the fuselage wall in arterial spurts. Red fluid, lifeblood of the aircraft. The bomber was dying, and England was still 140 miles away. They were dead men. They just didn't know how long it would take. 3 miles above and to the starboard side, First Lieutenant James Howell saw it happen. His P-47 Thunderbolt, bearing the name Jersey Thunder stenciled in white letters below the cockpit, banked hard as Howell tracked the crippled bomber with his eyes. He was 24 years old, a farm kid from New Jersey who'd somehow survived 312 combat hours over Europe. 72 missions, more than enough to understand exactly what happened to stragglers. The bomber formation pressed onward without hesitation. Standard operating procedure. One damaged aircraft couldn't compromise the entire group's survival. Hayes understood this. Strategic thinking, cold mathematics. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Frank Morrison, was already running calculations in his head. 3 engines operational. Maximum speed maybe 160 knots indicated. Altitude bleeding away at 200 feet per minute. German fighters circling like sharks, sensing blood in the water. The math didn't favor survival. Howell keyed his radio transmitter. "Big friend, this is Jersey 27. I have you visual. Stay with me." Hayes's voice crackled back through Howell's headset, tight with controlled fear. Professional to the end. "Jersey, we're losing hydraulics. Number 3 is on fire. Can't maintain altitude. Copy that, big friend. I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise Howell had absolutely no authorization to make. His fuel gauge showed 58 minutes of flight time remaining, maybe less, depending on throttle settings and combat maneuvering. The bomber was crawling through the sky at 140 knots. England lay 90 miles to the northwest. The mathematics didn't favor anyone's survival. But mathematics had never stopped men from making promises anyway. The missions had begun 6 hours earlier at Thorpe Abbott's airfield, home of the legendary 100th Bomb Group. The Bloody 100th, they called it, a nickname earned in blood and fire. Hayes and his 10-man crew were flying their 19th mission together, a daylight precision strike against ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt, deep in the heart of Germany. Intelligence had promised light resistance, maybe 50 fighters, nothing the escorts couldn't handle. Intelligence had been catastrophically, murderously wrong. 320 B-17s had crossed the English Channel that morning, their contrails writing equations of death across the autumn sky. The Luftwaffe met them with over 400 fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, rising in lethal swarms from a dozen scattered airfields across occupied Europe. The sky became an abattoir, a slaughterhouse at altitude. Bombers fell in flames, spinning earthward, trailing debris and men. Some crews never had time to bail out. They just rode their burning aircraft down, praying or screaming, or both. The P-47 escorts fought desperately, but their range was brutally limited. At the German border, they'd turned back, fuel tanks nearly dry, leaving the bombers to face the wolves alone, naked, vulnerable, dying. Hayes's fortress had taken its first hit during the bomb run. Flak burst beneath the aircraft, invisible fists of shrapnel punching through thin aluminum skin that offered about as much protection as a cotton shirt. The ball turret gunner, Sergeant Eddie Martinez, took fragments in his left shoulder. The waist gunner, Corporal Tommy Briggs, was knocked unconscious by a chunk of metal that dented his helmet, but somehow, miraculously, didn't penetrate his skull. Then came the fighters. 4 Focke-Wulf 190s dove from 11 o'clock high, their wings sparkling with cannon fire. Pretty, almost, like fireworks, except those sparks meant death. The top turret gunner, Sergeant Paul Richter, poured 50 caliber rounds into the lead fighter. Tracer fire formed a deadly arc of light. The Focke-Wulf exploded in midair, disintegrating into tumbling debris. 1 down, 3 to go, but the other 3 pressed their attack with Teutonic efficiency. Professional killers doing professional work. That's when the number 3 engine died. Now, 15 minutes after leaving the target area, Hayes struggled to keep the aircraft level. The fortress descended through 22,000 feet. Morrison worked frantically to restart the damaged engine, but the propeller just windmilled uselessly, creating drag, dead weight, pulling them down faster. Worse, the hydraulic system was failing. Without hydraulic pressure, the gun turrets couldn't rotate. The bomb bay doors hung partially open, creating massive drag that pulled them downward like an anchor. "Skipper," Morrison said quietly, not looking at Hayes, "we should tell them to bail out." Hayes didn't answer immediately. Below them stretched the patchwork fields of occupied France, German territory. Men who bailed out became prisoners of war if they survived the descent. Sometimes partisan resistance fighters helped downed airmen escape back to England through occupied territory, across the Pyrenees into Spain. But the odds weren't good. Maybe 1 in 10 made it home, and Martinez was wounded. Could he even operate a parachute with a torn shoulder? Not yet, Hayes said. Above them, Howell scanned the sky with predator's eyes. His 850 caliber machine guns were loaded and ready. The Thunderbolt carried 3,400 rounds total, enough for approximately 34 seconds of continuous fire. He'd already expended 600 rounds in an earlier engagement, protecting the formation. That left 28 seconds, maybe 28 seconds of ammunition to protect a bomber for 90 miles of hostile territory. Movement at 2 o'clock. Howell's head snapped right. 3 BF-109s, painted in splinter camouflage, approached from the south, flying in loose formation. They'd spotted the wounded bomber. Stragglers were easy kills, and the Luftwaffe pilots knew it. This was target practice, sport almost. Howell didn't hesitate. He advanced the throttle and banked hard, positioning himself between the bomber and the approaching fighters. The P-47's Pratt and Whitney R 2800 engine roared, all 2,000 horsepower, driving him forward like a steel fist. The Thunderbolt accelerated to 300 knots. The lead Messerschmitt saw him coming and broke left. Too late. Howell lined up the shot, led the target, and pressed the firing trigger. All 8 guns erupted simultaneously. The recoil actually slowed the aircraft perceptibly. Spent shell casings streamed from the wings like metallic rain. Tracer rounds converged on the 109's fuselage. Hits. Solid hits. The German fighter's canopy shattered. Pieces of cowling metal tore away in the slipstream. White glycol coolant sprayed from the punctured radiator. The Messerschmitt rolled inverted and fell away, trailing smoke like a dying comet. The other 2 109s scattered immediately, climbing for altitude. They'd expected an easy kill, a wounded bomber with no escort. Instead, they'd found a P-47, flown by someone who clearly knew his business, someone dangerous. The Germans regrouped at 25,000 feet, weighing their options against their fuel state, deciding whether the kill was worth the risk. Inside the bomber, the crew had heard Howell's guns hammering and understood that someone was protecting them. Someone had stayed when they should have left. "Jersey, thanks for the save," Hayes transmitted. "But you're burning fuel. You should head home." "Negative, big friend. You've got company all the way to the fence." The fence, fighter pilot slang for the English Channel, the line between death and life, 90 miles away, at 140 knots ground speed. That meant 38 minutes of flight time. Howell checked his fuel gauge again. 42 minutes remaining. It would be close, dangerously close. The kind of close where a headwind could kill you. The bomber continued descending. 20,000 feet. 19,000. Hayes fought to slow the descent rate, but physics ruled absolutely here. 3 engines couldn't maintain altitude with combat damage and partially open bomb bay doors. The aircraft was essentially a flying brick with wings, an 8-ton glider that glided like a safe. At 18,000 feet, the bomber passed through a thin cloud layer. For 30 seconds, they flew blind, instrument references only. When they emerged into clear air, Howell immediately spotted trouble developing. 5 more fighters, BF-109s in a V formation, approaching from 12 o'clock level. The Germans had radioed for reinforcements. This was becoming a coordinated attack on a single, crippled target. They wanted this kill, wanted it badly. Howell positioned himself head-on to the enemy formation. It was a tactic that required nerves of absolute steel. 2 aircraft hurtling toward each other at a combined closing speed exceeding 500 knots, a head-on engagement where the first pilot to flinch loses everything, where hesitation means death. The German pilots saw the lone P-47 and hesitated momentarily. 1 fighter against 5 should be easy mathematics, but this pilot had already killed one of their comrades and damaged another. This wasn't a novice. This was someone who understood violence. At 3,000 yards, Howell opened fire. Long-range shooting, usually ineffective, wasting ammunition. But he wasn't trying to score kills. He was disrupting their formation, making them flinch, protecting the bomber behind him. Psychological warfare at 400 miles per hour. Tracer fire lanced through the sky. The lead Messerschmitt broke right. The tight formation scattered like startled birds. Howell dove under them, rolled inverted, and came up firing at the trailing 109. More hits. The German aircraft shuddered and banked away sharply, streaming smoke from its damaged engine. But the fight wasn't over. 2 Messerschmitts circled around, attempting to attack the bomber from the rear. Hayes's tail gunner, Sergeant Walt Kendrick, fired a burst from his twin 50s. But the guns jammed after 4 rounds. Kendrick swore viciously and frantically worked to clear the jam. Frozen fingers, panic making everything harder. Howell saw the threat developing. He horsed the Thunderbolt around in a brutal high G turn, vision graying at the edges from the acceleration forces. The P-47 wasn't known for maneuverability like the nimble Spitfire, but Howell had learned to make the big fighter dance when necessary. He closed to 600 yards on the nearest 109 and fired. The German pilot never saw it coming. 50 caliber bullets stitched across the Messerschmitt's wing root. The wing folded upward, torn away by aerodynamic forces. The fighter tumbled end over end and disappeared into the clouds below. The remaining German fighters broke off the attack and fled eastward. 3 aircraft lost or damaged in 5 minutes. The price was too high for 1 bomber kill. Silence. Relative silence anyway. The rumble of engines and the whistle of wind through damaged metal. Hayes allowed himself 1 deep breath. "Jersey 27, you just saved our lives." Howell didn't respond immediately. He was checking his fuel gauge with growing concern. 28 minutes remaining. The channel was still 65 miles away, and the bomber was down to 16,000 feet, still descending like a stone with wings. Morrison looked at Hayes. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Hayes studied the instruments. Altitude, airspeed, fuel remaining in tanks 1 and 2, oil pressure on the 3 functioning engines. Everything told the same story. The numbers didn't lie. Numbers never lied. "We'll make it to the channel," Hayes said. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. After that, they'd ditch in the freezing water and hope the RAF rescue launches found them before hypothermia killed them all. Survival time in October North Sea water was approximately 20 minutes. Then you just went to sleep. Permanently. Above them, Howell faced his own brutal calculations. His fuel gauge now showed 23 minutes. The bomber was 58 miles from the English coast. At current speed, that meant 24 minutes of flight time. He'd run out of fuel 1 minute before the bomber reached safety. 1 minute, 60 seconds. The difference between life and death measured in heartbeats. Howell made his decision. He pulled the throttle back to minimum cruise setting, leaned the fuel mixture to maximum economy, and adjusted his propeller pitch for maximum efficiency. Every trick he knew to stretch fuel endurance. Every technique learned through 300 hours of combat. Maybe, just maybe, he could squeeze out 2 more minutes. Below and ahead, the French countryside rolled past. Small villages, farm fields, roads where German trucks moved supplies toward the front. Enemy territory all the way to the water. No friendly faces down there. Just Germans and collaborators and death. The bomber descended through 15,000 feet. The No. 3 engine's fire had extinguished itself. Nothing left to burn. But the drag from the windmilling propeller and damaged cowling was enormous, like flying with a barn door attached to the wing. Hayes trimmed the aircraft as best he could, but every control input felt sluggish, mushy. The hydraulics were nearly gone. 13,000 feet. Howell stayed close, weaving above and behind the bomber in a protective S pattern. His eyes never stopped moving. Scan the sky. Check the fuel gauge. Scan again. Every German fighter pilot in northern France probably knew about the crippled bomber by now, probably plotting intercepts, calculating angles, 12,000 feet. The bomber punched through another layer of clouds. When they emerged, Morrison spotted them first. "Fighters, 10 o'clock high. 4 contacts. No, 6. Hayes felt his stomach tighten into a cold knot. 6 BF-109s in a perfect attack formation, diving from 17,000 feet. The Germans had assembled a hunting pack specifically for this kill. No more probing attacks. This was a coordinated strike meant to finish the job decisively. Professional work. Execution. Howell saw them simultaneously. 6 against 1. The Thunderbolt carried enough ammunition for maybe 20 seconds of continuous fire. He'd have to make every single burst count. No wasted shots, no second chances. He pushed the throttle forward. Fuel economy be damned now, and climbed to meet them. The P-47 accelerated upward, engine screaming. Howell selected the lead fighter and opened fire at 1,200 yards. Too far for accurate shooting, but again, he wasn't hunting kills. He was disrupting their attack geometry, forcing them to react to him instead of executing their plan. The lead Messerschmitt broke formation to avoid the tracers. The precise attack pattern collapsed into chaos. 2 fighters veered left. 2 went right. 2 continued straight. Howell singled out the rightmost 109 and closed to 400 yards. He pressed the trigger. The 850s hammered. The Messerschmitt's tail section disintegrated under the impact. The aircraft pitched up violently, stalled, and fell away spinning. but the other 5 were now attacking from multiple vectors. Howell couldn't cover all approaches simultaneously. The geometry was impossible. 2 109s dove on the bomber from 7 o'clock high, cannon fire sparkling from their wings like malevolent stars. Inside the bomber, tail gunner Kendrick had finally cleared his gun jam. He swung the twin 50s onto target and fired. 50 caliber rounds ripped into the lead attacker's engine cowling. White smoke erupted. The Messerschmitt pulled up sharply and broke away. But the second fighter pressed the attack with Prussian determination. Professional, remorseless. 20-millimeter cannon shells walked across the bomber's left wing, punching through aluminum skin like paper. One shell exploded directly in the number 2 fuel tank. The tank was nearly empty. They'd burned most of their fuel getting to the target. But residual vapors ignited. Flames erupted from the wing. "Fire in number 2!" Morrison shouted. He reached for the engine fire suppression controls and pulled the handle hard. Carbon dioxide flooded the engine compartment. The flames flickered and died. But the damage was catastrophic. Number 2 engine was destroyed, the propeller seized, frozen in place. The bomber now flew on 2 engines, 2 engines out of 4. Half power, double trouble, altitude dropped through 11,000 feet. Hayes fought the controls desperately, trying to maintain even a shallow descent rate, but the aircraft wanted to roll left. The weight of the dead engines created an asymmetric drag profile that fought him constantly. "Skipper, we got a bail," Morrison said, louder this time, urgency creeping into his voice. Hayes shook his head. "Not yet. Jersey's still with us," and he was. Howell had engaged the remaining fighters in a savage dogfight at 10,000 feet. The Thunderbolt's rugged construction saved his life twice in 30 seconds. Cannon shells struck his aircraft, but failed to penetrate the armor plating behind the cockpit. One round tore through the left wing, missing the fuel tank by 18 inches, close enough to smell death. Howell destroyed one more Messerschmitt, a deflection shot from an impossible angle that caught the German pilot completely by surprise. The 109 exploded mid-air, a brief orange fireball that left a black smudge across the sky. The remaining 3 German fighters finally broke off. They'd lost 3 aircraft trying to kill this one bomber. Their fuel was critically low. The engagement wasn't worth continuing, not worth dying for. Howell rejoined the bomber, now descending through 9,000 feet. His fuel gauge showed 11 minutes remaining. The English Channel was 42 miles ahead. At the bomber's current speed, that meant 18 minutes of flight time. 7 minutes short. The mathematics of death. Howell keyed the radio. "Big friend, I'm going to have to leave you soon. Fuel state critical." There was a long pause before Hayes responded. "Understood, Jersey. You've already done more than anyone could ask. Get yourself home." "Negative. I'll stay with you as long as I can." In the bomber's cockpit, Morrison leaned toward Hayes. "He's going to crash trying to save us." Hayes knew it was true. The mathematics was simple and absolutely unforgiving. If the P-47 pilot stayed with them all the way to the Channel, he'd run out of fuel over enemy territory. He'd have to bail out or crash land. Either way, he'd become a prisoner of war, or a corpse in a French field, 8,000 feet. The bomber's descent rate had accelerated to 300 feet per minute. At this rate, they'd be at wave-top level before reaching the coast. If they had to ditch, the impact would tear the aircraft apart. Survival odds maybe 30%, and that was optimistic. In the radio room, Donnelly used his remaining hydraulic pressure to manually crank down the landing gear. A precaution. If they somehow made it to England, they'd need wheels for landing. 7,000 feet. The French coast appeared on the horizon. Beyond it, 35 miles of cold grey water. Beyond that, England. Safety. Home. Life. Howell's fuel gauge touched the red line. 8 minutes remaining. Maybe less. The gauge wasn't perfectly accurate at low fuel states. Below them, the coastal town of Dieppe passed. Underneath, German anti-aircraft batteries opened fire immediately. Black puffs of flak burst around the bomber. Hayes jinked left, then right, trying to spoil the gunner's aim. One shell detonated close enough to rock the aircraft violently. Shrapnel peppered the fuselage. In the waist gun position, Corporal Briggs, now conscious again after being knocked out earlier, felt something warm running down his leg. He looked down. Blood. A piece of shrapnel had caught him in the thigh. Not serious, but it hurt like hell. "Waist gunner hit!" someone shouted over the intercom. "How bad?" Hayes demanded. "Not bad, skipper. I can still walk." 6,000 feet. They crossed the coastline and flew out over the channel. The water below looked dark and profoundly uninviting. Surface conditions showed moderate seas, white caps visible. Water temperature approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time 20 minutes before hypothermia shut down vital organs, before you just drifted away into permanent sleep. Howell checked his fuel gauge one more time. 5 minutes. The English coast was still 28 miles away. He'd run dry 12 miles short of land. He made his decision. The only decision a warrior could make. "Big friend, I'm heading for the deck, going to set her down in the water close to you. When you ditch, we'll be in the same area. Better chance for rescue that way." Hayes understood immediately what Howell was planning. Instead of turning back and trying to reach French territory, where he might crash land and survive as a prisoner of war, the P-47 pilot was choosing to ditch in the channels alongside them. He'd risk death to stay with them until the end. "Jersey. Negative. You can still make it back to France. You'll survive as a prisoner. Not leaving you, big friend. We're going home together, or not at all." Inside the bomber, the crew heard this exchange over the intercom. 10 men who'd accepted their probable death suddenly felt something like hope. Someone was staying with them. They weren't alone. Brothers don't abandon brothers. 5,000 feet. Howell descended alongside the bomber, matching their rate of descent. His fuel gauge showed 3 minutes. The engine would quit soon. When it did, he'd have perhaps 90 seconds of gliding flight before hitting the water. 4,000 feet. Hayes scanned the horizon desperately. Nothing. No rescue boats, no ships, just empty ocean stretching to infinity. 3,000 feet. Howell's engine coughed once, the first sign of fuel starvation. He switched fuel tanks quickly, hoping to squeeze out another 30 seconds from residual fuel in the lines. Every second mattered now. 2,000 feet. Hayes began his ditching checklist. Morrison read off items, his voice mechanical, detached, professional to the very end. "Crew, prepare for water landing. Assume crash positions. Impact in 90 seconds. In the tail section, Kendrick strapped himself in tight. In the radio room, Donnelly braced against the bulkhead. In the waist, Briggs and the other gunners wedged themselves between equipment racks. In the ball turret, Martinez was frantically trying to climb out. The ball turret would be a death trap in a water landing. A steel coffin. 1,000 feet. Howell's engine coughed again, longer this time. The propeller windmilled for 2 seconds before power resumed briefly. A death rattle. Hayes lined up into the wind, trying to minimize ground speed at impact. The bomber descended through 800 feet. 700, 600. Howell's engine quit. The sudden silence was shocking. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 that had roared for the past 3 hours simply stopped. The propeller continued windmilling, but without power, the P-47 became a glider. An 8-ton glider with lousy glide characteristics, a rock with wings. Howell immediately pushed the nose down to maintain airspeed. He'd need speed for the water landing. Too slow and the aircraft would stall and cartwheel. Too fast, and the impact would tear off the wings. 400 feet, Hayes pulled back on the yoke, flaring the bomber. The aircraft's nose came up. Airspeed bled off. 120 knots, 110, 100. The bomber hit the water. The impact was catastrophic. The fuselage struck the wave tops, and the entire airframe flexed like a living thing. Rivets popped, seams split. Water exploded upward in huge plumes that blocked out the sky. The bomber skipped once, twice, then settled into the water and began sliding forward in a fountain of spray. Inside, the crew was thrown forward violently against their restraints. Equipment tore loose and became deadly projectiles. The bombardier, Lieutenant Carl Vickers, felt his shoulder dislocate as he slammed into the instrument panel. Martinez, still climbing out of the ball turret, was crushed when the turret collapsed on impact. The aircraft slid for 300 yards before finally stopping. Water immediately began pouring through 100 cracks and holes. The bomber was sinking fast. "Everybody out, now!" Hayes shouted. The crew scrambled for exits. The top hatch, the waist gun windows, the nose hatch. Morrison kicked open the escape hatch above his seat and pulled Hayes toward it. "Come on, skipper!" They tumbled out onto the wing. The bomber was already settling, tilting to the left, where water rushed in through damaged sections. The aircraft had maybe 2 minutes before it sank completely. 200 yards away, Howell fought his own desperate battle. The P-47 hit the water nose first at 90 knots. The engine, weighing over 2,000 pounds, drove downward like an anchor. The aircraft flipped forward, and Howell was slammed against the instrument panel. His head struck the gun sight. Blood ran into his eyes. Everything went red. Water flooded the cockpit. Cold, shockingly, paralyzingly cold, like being stabbed with 1,000 knives. Howell gasped and fumbled for the canopy release. His hands were numb. Everything was numb. He pulled the emergency release handle, and the canopy separated. Water rushed in with terrible force. Howell pushed himself up and out, fighting against the weight of his flight gear and parachute. The aircraft was sinking fast, dragging him down toward the dark water. He struggled free, just as the tail disappeared beneath the surface. He surfaced, gasping, and saw the bomber 400 yards away. Men were jumping from the wings into the water. Orange life rafts deployed. At least some of the emergency equipment still worked. Howell inflated his Mae West life vest and began swimming toward the bomber. Every stroke was pure agony. The cold water sapped his strength with terrifying speed. His flight boots felt like lead weights. His vision was blurring. He reached the nearest life raft, and hands pulled him aboard roughly. Hayes's face appeared above him. "Jersey, you crazy bastard! You actually did it!" Howell couldn't speak. He was shaking too hard from the cold. Someone threw a blanket over him. They counted heads. 8 men in the first raft, 3 in the second. 11 total. But there should be 10 bomber crew and 1 fighter pilot. That was 11. Wait. Someone was missing. "Where's Martinez?" Hayes demanded. Silence. Then Donnelly spoke quietly. "He didn't make it out, skipper. The ball turret." Hayes closed his eyes. 9 saved, 1 lost. The mathematics of war. Always a price. Always blood. They floated in the cold Channel water for 18 minutes before the RAF rescue launch found them. 18 minutes that felt like hours. Men recited prayers. Some cried. Some just stared at the grey sky, waiting for death or rescue, whichever came first. When the British boat pulled alongside and began hauling them aboard, Hayes made absolutely sure Howell went first. "This man," Hayes told the British sailors, "this man stayed with us for 90 miles, fought off 20 enemy fighters, ran out of fuel and ditched alongside us. He saved 9 lives today." The British captain looked at Howell, soaking wet and shivering violently, and nodded with profound respect. "Well done, Yank. Well done indeed." 3 days later, Howell received the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation read simply, "For extraordinary heroism in combat against enemy forces." Hayes and his crew attended the ceremony. They stood at rigid attention and saluted as the medal was pinned to Howell's chest. Years after the war ended, a journalist asked Hayes about that day. He said, "We were dead. We knew it. Everyone knew it. The math said we were dead. Then this pilot in a P-47 decided we weren't dying that day. He stayed with us when he should have left. He fought for us when the odds were impossible. He ditched in the ocean rather than leave us alone. That's not courage. That's something beyond courage. I don't have a word for it. Maybe there isn't a word for it." James Howell returned to civilian life after the war and never spoke much about his combat service. When people asked about the medal, he'd change the subject immediately. Deflect. Redirect. The memories were too heavy to carry in conversation. But the men of that B-17 crew never forgot. Every year until his death in 1998, Howell received Christmas cards from the families of the men he'd saved. 9 lives, 90 miles. One decision that defined what it meant to be a warrior. What it meant to be human. The men who flew these missions understood sacrifice in ways most of us never will. They flew into fire because someone had to. They stayed when they should have fled, because brothers don't abandon brothers, because some promises matter more than survival, because mathematics don't account for the human spirit. If this story moved you, honor their memory by subscribing to this channel. Share these stories with family and friends so these acts of heroism are never forgotten. So the mathematics of courage aren't lost to time. Next time, we'll tell you about the B-24 pilot who landed his burning bomber to save his trapped crew. Another story of men who refused to accept the mathematics of death. Until then, remember what they did. Remember why they did it. And remember that freedom has always had a price, paid in full by men like James Howell. Men who understood that some things are worth more than survival, that brotherhood transcends mathematics, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your decisions. They were the greatest generation for a reason. They faced impossible odds and chose to fight anyway. They stared at death and decided to protect their brothers instead of saving themselves. That's the legacy. That's what we owe them to remember. Not just that they won, but how they won, and what they sacrificed to do it.